This story about Jim Webb, who is the odd man out in the Democrat field for president of the United States. He's got 2% of support among voters in the Democrat Party. That he is pulling out of the Democrat race altogether, but likely will consider running as an independent or perhaps getting adopted by one of the smaller parties in the country. I actually think the man could get a lot more traction and a lot more attention if he does that than standing on stage with all of those other Democrats as he did a week ago. He is not what you would call a very liberal Democrat in the sense he's much more like some of you, obviously, in this part of the country have memories of Scoop Jackson. Much more along those lines when it comes to being a Democrat, and perhaps there's no room for him in that party anymore because of that. So he made this announcement. I was reading about it earlier today. This was on the website of CBS News. A press release entitled Jim Webb to Consider Independent Run said the candidate will hold a press conference Tuesday, that would be today, to discuss his candidacy, the campaign, and his views of the political parties in the current election cycle. Now, you have to remember, Jim Webb has often been a thorn in the side to Republicans simply because he came out of the Vietnam War as a decorated war hero. He probably wouldn't like that term hero. I have a friend who worked at the Pentagon with him and said not really a very nice guy at all. In fact, I won't tell you. My friend sort of compared him to a human appendage, so I won't bring that into the conversation. And he was a thorn in the side to President George W. Bush during the Iraqi War. That continued for a long stretch. He didn't think that we should be fighting in that theater. But he does not play well with Democrats either. The Federalist had a piece that was published last night at Real Clear Politics. That's an aggregator site. In other words, they bring together a lot of different pieces from some of the best writers in the country. And the writer at this piece at the Federalist was saying, and I found this to be fascinating, there were 6 takeaways from the Democrats when they had their debate a week ago. And one of those is Dr. Utopia is in. Now, Hillary Clinton referred to Barack Obama as Dr. Utopia back in 2008. Well, Bernie Sanders, now apparently running far to the left of anyone, probably since Norman Thomas, going back about 90 years ago in this country. At one point during the debate, Webb got frustrated. He turned to Sanders and said, "Bernie, I don't think the revolution's going to come." So we understand that this is a guy who would really like to restore America, perhaps to a condition it was 50, 60 years ago. And once more, there's just no place for him among the nation's Democrats. I wanted to bring this up right off the top of the show today. We've got a couple of guests coming along shortly. Grant Loeb's Twin Falls County prosecutor is going to be joining us in a short while. I also hope to talk with him a little bit about the Benghazi hearings and Trey Gowdy, because, as you know, many of you know, before he became Twin Falls County prosecutor, he was a staffer on Capitol Hill for many years. He knows what it's like to be in some of these hearings, and he can break that down. You know, I've heard people say, well, it's been politicized. Look, it's Washington. Everything is political. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. It might be political, but they're still onto something. So that's coming up shortly. Also, Steve Millington will be joining us a little later this morning, our Twin Falls County Republican Party chairman. This is a piece from the Washington Post. Robert Samuelson, who's one of my favorite newspaper columnists. He doesn't get a lot of attention because he's not a big television media hog like some of his coworkers who you see as talking heads, 24/7, it appears. Samuelson, though, is a guy who writes just about the economy, and he's second-generation economist in this sense. He just writes in plain language, and he says, here's how it is. And he would not know if he was a Democrat or a Republican. My guess he's in the latter column, but he doesn't endorse anyone in any sense. He just tells you what candidates aren't doing and what they should be doing. And he's writing, whoever wins next November will inherit 3 major domestic problems that, though obvious, are downplayed because the politics are so unfavorable. And he says he'll exclude foreign policy and climate change. Those aren't really big areas that he writes about. He just simply focuses with a laser beam on economic issues. First, we are in an aging society. Inevitably, the costs of Social Security, Medicare, and nursing home care under Medicaid will grow dramatically. Now, you've got people out there who seem to think Santa Clauses keep coming. Sometimes they call this program shout for 10 seconds and then hang up. Obviously, they don't have a good grasp of what all of these programs cost and that money isn't growing on trees to pay for them. The writer says if we do not trim Social Security and Medicare spending by slowly raising eligibility, cutting benefit, and that would be for your age, by the way, so likely 70 years old before you would collect, cutting benefits and increasing premiums for wealthier recipients, we face savage cuts in other government programs, much higher taxes, bigger deficits, or all three. There are people who predict that if we don't rein in and we don't figure out a solution to all of this, that Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and I've said I don't talk about these things a lot on the air, but I will today, that they will eventually eat up that entire budget. That means no money for tanks. That means no money for guns, no money for ships, no money for airplanes, no money for roads. You're starting to understand, I would hope, what all of this would mean for the United States. And this could happen in a matter of just 30 years. And yet your politicians aren't talking about it because, well, they can't get elected if they're not saying, hey, if you elect me, I'll come down the chimney with a big sack of toys. And it won't cost mom and dad anything. I'll make them up at the North Pole just out of the kindness of my heart. He also writes the need here is for immigrants to assimilate. This is another one. He says America is an immigrant society, and it's not mainly the 11 million illegal immigrants. He goes on to say, unless we curb immigration of the unskilled, that means people who are coming here with really no skills whatsoever. Bringing someone here who's a physician, a surgeon, that's a good thing. I mean, that we have shortages in some of those categories. But bringing people here who are unskilled, he says, we will never make much progress against poverty. And he says these people are not going to assimilate. And he wants to point out, too, that they will compete for your jobs. And in fact, later today, if we get a chance, Jeff Sessions and Dave Bratt, who one's for a senator from Alabama, the other is the congressman from Virginia, they are saying that if this doesn't stop in the next 10 years, a great many Americans who hardworking people simply aren't going to have a job any longer. Now, Samuelson says third American economic growth has slowed sharply since World War II. Annual growth has averaged 3 or 4%. Now it's down to 2%. And then he has this. Weaker economic growth means weaker gains in wages, salaries, and then it means weaker gains in tax collections. So for all of those programs we can't afford right now, there will be the pool of money to fund them will also be shrinking. Now, it's considered to be mean to say that, I guess, in this country. That's why politicians in both the Democrat and Republican parties don't talk about it. If they talk about it in some of your other parties, I don't know how many other parties there actually are. You could have probably 100 of them. If they're talking about it, no one's hearing them. They simply don't have the wherewithal to get the message out. In fact, if you go to our website, newsradio1310.com, and you look at my latest commentary, I actually discuss that. I cite the fact that Gary Nolan, who was an old friend of mine from his talk radio days when I worked in upstate New York, now working, I believe, in Denver, Gary Nolan left a syndicated radio talk show in 2004, and he was the odds-on favorite to be the Libertarian Party nominee for president. Didn't happen. Later on, I asked why they went with a guy, a complete unknown. I knew the state chairman of that party, and he happened to be an old neighbor, and he said, well, the other guy gave a great speech at the convention, so everyone decided to vote for him. I said, yes, but Gary Nolan had been on 100 radio stations around the country. He obviously, as a candidate, knew his way around media, and he could get himself on all of those radio stations as a guest because he has a lot of contacts. Your guy that you nominated doesn't have any of that. Therefore, your Libertarian Party message will not be heard this year. So you're right at the moment, those third parties, as we call them, they don't really have a shot. Not just because they lack the resources, but they don't seem to have the brains to get their acts together. When they have these golden opportunities, they decide to shoot their toes off. It's 8:15. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. If you'd like to reach our program today, you can give us a call at 736-0300. That's 736-0300. My email address is bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. Also, while all of the big folks in media seem to be writing off the Republican Party because the Republican Party is having a serious political debate with itself, especially in the House of Representatives, Raul Labrador will join us tomorrow morning, and we'll be chatting a little bit about that about 8:15 tomorrow morning here on the program. So I hope you can stick around and hear some of that too. I'm telling you right now, for all of this talk that the Republican Party is imploding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, actually, that's quite a healthy debate. Having that kind of debate is likely something that's going to be very good in the long run for the party. And everyone is getting a chance to have their opinion heard before all of the smoke clears with this. Over at Vox, which I don't believe is a what I would call a publication at all friendly to conservatives and Republicans in this country, a writer is talking about the future of the Democrat Party, Matthew Iglesias, and he says, before anyone starts cheering the demise of the Republican Party, take a closer look at the Democrats. He says the presidency is extremely important, of course, but there are also thousands of critically important offices all the way down the ballot, and the vast majority, 70% of state legislatures, more than 60% of governors, 55% of attorneys general, and secretaries of state are in Republican hands. And he goes on to say Democrats aren't even talking about how to improve on their weak points because, by and large, they don't even admit that they exist. Instead, the party is focused on a competition between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton over whether they should go a little bit to Obama's left or a lot to his left. He had some graphs and maps here. What's happened in this country over the last dozen years? People say, well, 2010 was that watershed year, and then 2014, another watershed year as Republicans continue to make gains in the House and Senate. But if you go back to the middle of the last decade, Republicans started picking up more and more seats in state legislatures, more and more governorships, and here in Idaho, which used to have a healthy Democrat Party, it doesn't exist any longer. Today, could Cecil Andrus get elected? I don't know that could happen, not in this political climate. So that's what's happened, and he's pointing out Democrats have been oblivious to all of this as it's going on nationwide. That's why they don't have a bench. That's why all of their candidates are 178 years old. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. And this writer goes on to say, elections for state legislature rarely make the national news, but they are the fundamental building blocks of American politics, since they run the redistricting process for the U.S. House and also for themselves. And the maps with this piece were just priceless. I was looking this over today, and you can just, it was a time-lapse map, and you can just see how things are getting redder and redder and redder, and in many places that you would never actually expect this to happen, it has happened. Going to be an exciting time if we can get through it. I guess when the rain showers clear and the sun comes back out, every once in a while, things do go well for us in life. Maybe we're headed that direction. Let's hope so, because the news of the last 15 years has mainly been so depressing. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning. Got plenty more coming up. As I mentioned, we're expecting, during the course of the show today, Twin Falls County Prosecutor Grant Loebs. He's going to talk a little bit about Trey Gowdy in the Benghazi hearings. And Steve Millington joining us as well, Twin Falls County Republican Party Chairman. All of that on the way. I'm going to add a quick note. You've got a lot of people in American media, they don't generally follow what goes on in Canadian politics. The Liberal Party, now second-generation Trudeau, he was a man absolutely despised by a whole series of American presidents. He has a son, younger son, who is now going to be the next prime minister in that country, replacing the Conservative Party leader, Stephen Harper. And lefties down here say, oh, there's a warning for Republicans there. Well, what happened in Canada was this. As many of you notice when you drive by a gas station, the price of oil has dropped. Stephen Harper lost because they did not maintain that price of oil, and in some of the big places where they had huge, in some of these communities where there was nothing 20 years ago, up in Alberta, you've got 125,000 people living there now who moved there for the oil boom, and now they've got nothing. They're on assistance. So that was really beyond his control, and Canadian conservatives, frankly, are not like American conservatives. By no means are they that conservative. It's 49. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. Wanted to make a mention this morning of our friends over at High Desert Meat Processing in Twin Falls, where they are processing one animal at a time. What you bring in is what you're going to get back. Darren Van Horn, the owner of High Desert Meat Processing, he's been in the meat business now for over 30 years. And we would recommend you visit High Desert Meat Processing on Facebook, where you can see reviews of customers, or give High Desert Meat Processing a telephone call. That telephone number is 734-9949, and they do domestic processing as well. High Desert Meat does in-house smoking. Nothing gets shipped out. And they do specialty meats, summer sausage, kielbasa, breakfast sausage, brats, Polish dogs, hot dogs, and much more, such as jerky and pepperoni and salami. USDA approved. Darren works closely with local beef growers and their programs to ensure quality meat. That number is 734-9949. I believe we have a caller with us in this segment of the program right off the top. You're up next. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And what's on your mind?
Yeah, good morning, Bill. Well, it's really important that the most important elective office is the sheriff, and keeping our police local as opposed to national police. And Al Sharpton and the liberals, socialists, etc., have been pushing for a national police force. So they've been openly doing this. Tonight there's a meeting at the KMVT community room at 7 o'clock, a Support Your Local Police Committee meeting. And I would invite everybody, it's a free meeting, to come and find out how they can support their local police. Realizing there's always officers that don't exactly live up to the standards of police, but believe me, we do not want a national police force imposed upon us, because that's the epitome of what a dictator would want.
I saw a video last week, a JBS video, where they gave you the history of what happens, especially in places like Europe or South America, when you end up with a nationalized police force. It said, oh, well, this will solve all of our problems. And they cited, of course, the obvious one. That was in Germany, where the Gestapo, which I guess is an abbreviation for German State Police, took over. But the young fellow who was actually narrating the video pointed this out. He said, you hear a lot about things that may happen in Missouri or Baltimore and the like with various police officers. But if we have a federal police department, he said, stop and think about that. Who criticized the feds for Waco? Who criticized them for Ruby Ridge? In other words, the federal government, you don't hear that type of criticism, and there's no talk of an investigation. The federal government then, they become a threat when that happens.
Well, absolutely, and I hope that people will support our local police, keep them independent. The sheriff is the last line of defense between us and the feds, and so it's important that we know who the sheriff is, get acquainted with him, and express our concerns. But that meeting's 7 o'clock tonight at the KMVT community building. That's downstairs there on 1100 North Blue Lakes there. So I hope people will come out and attend that and learn more about how we can support our local police. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you much for the call. And I find that, I'm not defending the man at all, because I don't know all of the story. And yet up in the Nampa area, you had a sheriff, Canyon County Sheriff, I guess, who came out and he was criticizing the notion of a national police force. He was criticizing, he named the president and criticized President Obama and his Justice Department for their actions when it comes to how they deal with local police, and he said they're making the climate much worse for everyone. Not long after that sheriff actually came forward and said that, somebody said, oh, we're opening an investigation of this man. The timing of it, maybe it's just coincidental. Those things do happen. But I think that there is certainly an effort in this country to, we've seen it before. If you look back at what the IRS has been doing to people ever since the Obama administration came into the White House, it's been used. The other day when I was at this march against the refugee program, there was a woman there, and somebody told me, they said, that woman is a federal agent. I said, what? They said, yeah, she happened to be at a meeting a few weeks ago here in town on this subject. So she was there the other day. Nice looking lady, but I'm not, you got to be wary sometimes. She was there with a camera, of course, taking pictures. Now, that's what you'd call a light form of intimidation. Here's a government agent taking photographs of people who are involved in this effort. Well, they're not going to erase those photographs. Those photographs are going into a file somewhere, and next to your name, they're going to write, danger, danger, danger. And then if it ever hits the fan in this country, you're going to be at the top of their list. This is out and out intimidation. Yeah, you send a pretty-looking young lady out there to do it, but I'll tell you what, when government thinks it has to do that to people in what is called a constitutional and free republic, well, we are no longer a constitutional and free republic when that happens. And we have to hold this government accountable. That's where your local sheriff becomes highly important in all of this, because constitutionally, the sheriff is the highest elected official in your county. I mean, from the old notions, going all the way back to our colonial roots, the sheriff had more power than any military leader, any governor, or any king in that jurisdiction. It's 8:30. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. That's the bulwark of our liberty. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Hope you can stick around. I know Steve Millington is coming up sometime late in the show, and he'll be joining us talking a little local politics as well.